Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Racing News 365.com podcast, looking back at last weekend's thrilling Canadian Grand Prix. From racingnews365.com, my name is Nick Golding and I'm joined as always by 2023 Young Journalist of the Year Sam Coop and lead editor Ian Parks. Ian, we'll come to you first because we literally did our F1 update video about 8 hours ago. If you're watching this on YouTube and haven't seen that yet, be sure to go and check it out. I'm feeling a bit tired, I'll be completely honest with you. How are you? Because it was a thrilling race, but one that took us into the early hours thanks to the FIA.
Yeah, I'm thinking I could do with a couple of matchsticks right now to prop my eyes open. And
a couple?
I'm that tired. Yeah, exactly. Just a quick question, Nick, before we start. I want to know, are we going to forever introduce Sam Coop as Young Journalist of the Year?
Well, yes. Until somebody else wins it. He is the reigning world champion.
But is it like UK an F1 title where you're always a world champion? Will I always be a Young Journalist of the Year?
Because if you've won something, you will always be a Young Journalist of the Year.
Yeah, so come next year.
Just like Jacques Villeneuve will always be a world champion because he won.
So basically, so when somebody else wins it, basically, I'll then be introducing you as former UK Motorsport Journalist of the Year, Sam Coop. However, you're not that yet. You are still the current champion. So I think that's fair enough.
Maybe it's a mistake to say this publicly, but if Nick doesn't apply, let me know before the deadline, and we will submit on his behalf. Because it needs a submission from his editor as well, a letter of recommendation. So we will conspire to turn this on Nick.
Well, I've not decided yet.
I can't apply anymore because I'm not young. So there we go.
Are you not?
No, not really.
You look 25. You look 25 to me.
Thank
Sam
you
looks
so much.
older.
I really don't feel like it this morning.
No, I mean I'm with you on that one, Sam. You kind of had the luxury in a way of actually watching the race kind of from a fan perspective in a way. It was a thrilling race. What did you make of it as well? And also not having to write about it, which you're lucky on that one.
Yes, I did get an earlier night than both of you two. But obviously writing about it now, talking about it now, but writing about it today. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really, really entertaining. Funnily enough, my girlfriend halfway through the race goes, I just find F1 quite boring. And I thought, well, you know what? If you don't find this entertaining, you're never going to enjoy it. Like
that's a relationship. That's a relationship killer, if you're asking me.
Well, I don't know. I feel like diverse hobbies is not a bad thing. But
what's
anyway.
her favorite? What's her favorite show, though?
Oh, she's gonna hate me for this. Like Married at First Sight, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
there you go. Says it all.
Okay, so there you go. 1-1.
But yeah, it was a thoroughly enjoyable race. Really didn't know how it was going to shake out. Obviously, there's the air of unpredictability in Montreal anyway, with changeable weather as we experienced throughout the race. So yeah, it kind of very much. It wasn't until the closing stages that you really felt like, okay, we can see where this is going. But even then, the changing pace between the Mercedes and the McLarens made the podium fight really interesting. Into team battles as well. Lewis and George. That was also a gripping fight towards the end. So you really didn't know how it was all going to shake out. So it was a really interesting watch.
Well, it wasn't just, though, the changing pace. It was the changing conditions, because it went from wet to dry, which threw up some strategy conundrums. Obviously, in Ferrari's case, they completely failed on that front. But obviously, we'll talk about Ferrari a little bit later on. The driver that came out on top, mastered it all, was Max Verstappen on a weekend where we didn't think Red Bull were going to win. Red Bull were not the favourites. We were all expecting Ferrari and McLaren to take more points out of Verstappen and Red Bull. However, instead, the lead in both championships has been extended. Ian, how big a blow do you think this is to this potential title fight we were talking about, given that Verstappen has won at a venue where realistically he was not supposed to, based on the form book?
You say not supposed to, I wouldn't go that
far.
The suggestion was that Red Bull would struggle, given the fact that you have to do a significant amount of curb riding around the circuit, Gilles Villeneuve. they came out of Monaco, and we all know what happened there. Of course, Monaco, you have to be on the curbs almost constantly. At least with the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, you have a good number of long straightaways around which to make up time. However, it was clearly evident, great overlaying qualifying graphic that showed you George Russell and Max Verstappen's identical laps and as to who gained where and when. And actually, the Red Bull, the RB20, did quite well through the slow chicanes and around the hairpin. So, although no curbs, of course, around the hairpin, you just simply take the correct line. But nevertheless, through the chicanes, that RB20 didn't look too bad. But we obviously heard Max over the course of the Canadian Grand Prix weekend still bemoaning the fact that he was struggling to ride the curbs. He mentioned it again, not only during practice, but also again during the race, that it was proving to be a problem. And he referred to it post-race driver's press conference as well. So quite clearly, it's something that it continues to be a problem. He knows it's something that they've got to get on top of. He's asserted the fact that it's not going to be a quick fix. But yes, they did come out of a Canadian Grand Prix with a victory that they went into perhaps not expecting, that's for sure. But it's, we've mentioned many times, it's the mark of A, a great driver, B, a great team, that when the chips are down, or when you are facing a degree of adversity, as they were anticipating over the course of that weekend, you come out of it with flying colours. And ultimately, Max has extended his lead in the Drivers' Championship over Charles Leclerc, who, as we will refer to in this podcast, had an absolute anathema of a Grand Prix compared to what he had achieved 2 weeks previously in Monaco.
Just coming back to you though, Ian, as well, because something that was very crucial in Verstappen's win was that first safety car. It was very much roles reversed compared to Miami, because in this case, it was Verstappen who inherited the race lead effectively from that first safety car, which was caused by Logan Sargeant crashing. Lando Norris on this time was unfortunate the safety car wasn't on his side, but regardless, the most important thing with that, despite the fact that Lando then caught Max back up in the second safety car, Max gained the track position for the first safety car period, which proved to be absolutely crucial, given that whilst there was a dry line, there were still sections of the track which were wet, which made actually going off the racing line to pull off an overtake extremely difficult.
Yeah. As Max pointed again, I'm going to refer to some more Max comments in the driver's press conference. It's now 1-1 with regard to the safety car periods, because Lando benefited from one in Miami, quite clearly. Max benefited from this one in Canada. And just going to prove that we do read the comments that are posted below our videos, there's the very first comment that was posted last night, or in the early hours of this morning, because that's when the update went up, with regard to Nadal, and I hope I've read that correctly. Hey, the dude on the right is nonsense. That would be me. So apparently I was talking nonsense. The second safety car benefited Lando and got him right behind Max and made up loss of first safety car. Lando had fresher tyres but could not pass Max. So watch the story. Well, the story is, Nadal, and thank you very much for your comment. I don't think I do talk nonsense, but I will respond anyway, is that, as you say, track position is king. And Max benefited from that first safety car quite clearly because he managed to gain track position ahead of Lando. Yes, the second safety car allowed Lando Norris to catch up, but there was no track position gained. So yes, while it bunched the field and Lando had Max directly in front of him, that first safety car was crucial for Max to then control the lead from the front because he had managed to take advantage of it. Whereas Lando Norris, as we know, as Andrea Stella has pointed out, he missed the pit entry by 1.5 seconds when that safety car was called at the end of lap 25 after Logan Sargeant had crashed his Williams. 1.5 seconds. If he'd have caught that, he would have been in the pits on his fresh set of inters and he would have retained the lead. Yes, of course, the safety car would have bunched up the field. Max would have been right behind Lando. Would he have passed Lando? That's a hypothetical we are never going to know. But what is key was Max got ahead of Lando under that first safety car, just as the safety car played into Lando's hands in Miami. So there we go. There's my bit of nonsense for you. Thank you, Nadal.
It was, it was fine margins, obviously, with Norris missing, the pit entrance. But obviously, Red Bull were kept awake like we were long into the evening because, obviously, whilst it was joys on the Verstappen side of the team, for Sergio Perez, obviously crashed out of the race, managed to recover his car and brought it back to the pits with the rear wing hanging off the back of it. He has received, obviously, a massive fine, but more importantly and more crucially, a 3-place grid penalty for the Spanish Grand Prix. Sam, on a weekend where, he was supposed to be celebrating his new contract, it was another shocker for Perez.
It was. There's no denying that. There's no shying away, hiding from it. It wasn't the standard he would have wanted to usher a new contract in with, and he was off the mark from the start of the weekend, and it just got worse and worse and worse progressively. He is in a car that should never be going out in Q1. I think it's 5 times now since the start of last year that he's failed or been eliminated in Q1. He's in that time, he's been out-qualified by Logan Sargent 6 times. Alex Albon in the other Williams has never been out-qualified by Logan Sargent in a Grand Prix qualifying session. That is a damning stat. And yes, it doesn't always tell the full story, but he just is. He isn't able to hook it up when he needs to. That one moment, that one lap. He claimed that he had issues in qualifying, car issues in qualifying, but again, we'll never know that. And in the race, from the first lap, it was messy. Came together with Gasly, compromised that first stint, and it just got worse and worse from there. The mistake, obviously, he was one of the unfortunate few to find the wall at turn 6, and then there came the trying to get back to the pits, which there's a level of playing the team game. The safety car wouldn't have been a good thing for Red Bull at that stage with Max leading. Also, as we know, with Circuit de Villeneuve being a temporary circuit, there's very few kind of runoff roads and exit roads. So you are kind of, if you're parking up, it's going to be a safety car. So he brought the car back to the pits. There's also a level of you don't want to have to walk back, right? you want to get the car back to the pits, so you're there. You can just kind of get out. But anyway, and yeah, it was an error in judgment whether it was his or the team that was ultimately responsible. He's driving the car. He's got, as you say, the 3-place grid penalty, which again hampers the next weekend. And he was very clear after the race that he just needs a clean, straightforward weekend to regain his confidence, regroup, reset. And again, he's going to have another weekend where at best he's starting 5th or 4th, but assuming he doesn't get pole. So yeah, it's just that knock-on effect now, and it keeps on being affected. And with that contract extension, there is a lot of pressure and a lot of eyes on him.
But the thing that's interesting is, you mentioned there, some of the words he was saying. He needs a clean weekend. He needs a reset. We've heard him say these comments at a similar time of year the last 2 seasons. And Ian, the crucial thing with his contract is that obviously it was kind of made out to be a 2-year deal. Whilst that is sort of the case, it's actually, we found out it's a 1+1. That's actually a massive, massive factor, given that it doesn't necessarily mean that he has a seat at Red Bull for 2026.
Yeah, exactly. And the bigger picture for Red Bull right now is this year's Constructors' Championship. They can count themselves extremely fortunate that Ferrari had the absolute shocker of a weekend that it did, because if they had been anywhere near the front like they have been for the most part of the previous 8 Grand Prix, then right now that gap at the top of the Constructors' Championship would be not quite in single digits, but getting very close to it. It stands at 49 points at present. And that's mainly on the back of obviously Max winning yesterday and scoring 25 points. If Ferrari had been right up there, then that gap would be somewhere around hovering around the mid-20s. So right now, Checo Perez is absolutely compromising the defence of Red Bull's Constructors' Championship, because we've seen what Max is doing in that car yet again. We saw what Max did in that car in the RB19 last year, and Checo couldn't match him. okay, the team won the Constructors' Championship, but Max could have, as we know, Max could have won that Constructors' Championship on his own with the points that he scored. Perez could have taken the entire season off, and Red Bull would have been Constructors' champions. This time around, Red Bull is in a fight with both Ferrari, with McLaren especially, and now we've got Mercedes looking like it's coming back into the mix. So those clear-cut points that Red Bull was so accustomed to last season are now that little bit more harder to come by at this point in the season. Yet, again, Max did a fantastic job, and he's really holding up his end of the bargain in terms of both defending his driver's title, but also Red Bull their constructor's title. But Red Bull really needs its second driver to start performing if it is most definitely going to keep its grip on that Constructors' Championship. And without a shadow of a doubt, Checo Perez right now is not performing. And I said it here previously, and I'll say it again now. I am absolutely astonished that Red Bull has decided to go ahead at this early stage in the season and give him a new contract. They should have waited that little bit more. They've got a great driver pool. Sonoda, Ricciardo, whatever you might think of him, and we heard Jacques Villeneuve's comments over the weekend, but Daniel had a good weekend, bounced back, and also Liam Lawson. They've got a great driver pool. They could arguably have turned to Carlos Sainz if they really wanted to, but we understand there's friction between the two fathers, Jos Verstappen and Carlos Sainz Sr., so that might not have played out well. But right now, Checo Perez, for me, is not a second driver for Red Bull, and he should not have been given his contract at this early stage.
Yeah, I completely agree on that, Sam. Same from you?
Yeah, I mean, just to add some further colour to the kind of the championship standings, it was 24 points heading into the weekend. As Ian points out, it's now 49. So in order to retain the gap as where it was, Ferrari could have finished fourth and fifth. Not even particularly good results, and that, in fact, that would have shrunk the gap slightly, because that would have been that would have been 22 points or so. So it would have been slightly extended. But they wouldn't even. You take my point. Okay, third and fifth. Would have kept it the same. They wouldn't have even needed to be the next best car in order to keep that gap where it was. That kind of adds colour to the fact that Max is fighting with one hand behind, or Red Bull are fighting with one hand behind their back, and they got lucky this weekend. They can't keep on getting lucky. There will be more circuits, there will be more scenarios where they are potentially not even the second strongest car, as we know. And then, if Mercedes' gains really are as good as they are, or appeared to be from Canada, could they even end up being the fourth fastest team at certain tracks, say Singapore? It's really critical now that things get turned around quickly for Sergio Perez, because, we're already seeing an influx of comments where people are saying Sonoda should have got the seat. And Sonoda has been retained for 2025. They could make that switch if they so wish to, because all Red Bull drivers are centrally contracted. That hopefully will add some pressure to Sergio Perez and help him get out of this funk. But I refer back to comments actually Christian Horner made to me at Silverstone last year. He kind of said that Perez is the kind of guy who needs an arm around the shoulder. This tough love approach that we saw from the Red Bull family with, say, Nick de Vries last season, I just don't think it works. Not that it worked for Nick de Vries, but I don't think it works for Sergio Perez. So how do they build that confidence up? It's very, very difficult. He is clearly a confidence driver.
Just referring to some of our fan comments below this morning's update, Monday morning's update, just for clarity. Kiwi Dave, Perez is a shocker. Disco Stew 65, Perez is like a deer in headlights at the moment. Just a couple of examples there, but this is clearly what the fans are thinking as well, that absolutely at the moment, Sergio Perez is not doing the job that he has been employed to do and has been handed this new 1+1 contract for. Because right now, Red Bull have got to be thinking, have we done the right thing? Did we react too soon? Well, yeah, you did, because you have a driver pool there just waiting. Why did you not wait that little bit longer? Yes, I know dominoes are falling in the driver market, and you've got to react that little bit quicker perhaps this season than you might ordinarily have had to do when you could have waited until the summer break or even beyond. But right now at this stage, with that driver performing the way he is, Red Bull for me has just jumped the gun a bit too soon.
But also, there's a level of that. It actually isn't any risk for Red Bull in the drive market because they have Lawson waiting in the wings. So worst comes to worst, you have Ricciardo and Lawson in that RB next season, and Yuki Tsunoda in Red Bull. That would be their kind of, if they were to drop Sergio Perez. So even more so, the decision to go so soon makes no sense.
It's obviously something I think we'll probably be discussing quite a lot over the coming weeks. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to let us know your thoughts on the whole Perez Red Bull situation in the comment section below. Right, let's move away from Red Bull and talk about a team we've kind of mentioned a couple of times who had a much better weekend in Canada, Mercedes. Russell in pole position, then finished third, the team's first podium of the season, which still sounds quite remarkable given all the dominance they had not that many years ago now. Hamilton, though, finished fourth and wasn't particularly happy after the race, Ian.
No, he had quite a bit to say, in fairness, Nick. Just not happy at all. Described it as one of his worst weekends, which was, I think he was being really harsh and very self-critical on himself there, because from the outside, it wasn't that bad. The only real fault you could lay at his door was his qualifying performance. But it was one of those, as we discussed on Saturday night's update, or rather the one that went out in the early hours of Sunday morning, given the time difference between Canada and where we are in the UK, where he again alluded to the fact that between practice and qualifying, something was not quite right, but something was occurring that he couldn't figure out, because obviously the car's not being changed in part for May. So what is going on? Because he'd had a brilliant practice. Final practice was superb, as we saw from Lewis. He was nearly 4 tenths ahead of his nearest rival coming out of FP3. And it really looked as like, wow, Lewis is on it. The car's back. He's back. And at that stage, I think we were predicting in our inner team chats that Lewis looks favourite for this one. And he ends up qualifying 7th. And that was on the back of he and George Russell finishing 1-2, quarter of a second between them in Q2. So Mercedes was certainly on course for a potential 1-2, if not certainly a 1-3, at worst a 1-4. But they come out of it with a 1-7. George on pole, dead heat with Max. And then Lewis, okay, I think it was about a quarter of a second that separated the top 7, which was just staggering, which was the same difference, as I've mentioned, between George and Lewis at the end of Q2. So real small marginal gains here. But Lewis just couldn't hook up that car in Q3, and that led to his poor grid slot. Did he make mistakes during the Grand Prix? He says he did. You look at it and I think, well, it wasn't that bad, Lewis, but obviously we know what Lewis is like. He is super hypercritical of himself on occasions, but we also have to remember that this is a driver that is in his final year with Mercedes. So, the team, whilst they obviously will want to do as much as they can for both drivers to get as high enough position in the Constructors' Championship as possible, will obviously be throwing more of a weight behind George to ensure he's got the best car possible compared to Lewis. But I didn't see too much difference across the weekend between them overall. It's just that George did a much better job in both qualifying and in the race. Yes, he made 2 mistakes, and they were costly. He could arguably have finished second, should really have finished second. And they were on him. But as for Lewis, I don't know. I don't think he did too bad a job. But this is Lewis being Lewis, as I say, being super critical of himself, as we know he can be.
And obviously, you mentioned there the couple of mistakes that George Russell made. And Sam, even George said himself, as he pulled into Parc Fermé, apologising to the team for a really messy race on his behalf. We know he's a fast driver, but we've seen a couple of times when he's in a position where he can compete for the win, that he does have a habit of making these small driver errors.
He does. And we also saw, in addition to those small driver errors, some very kind of risky overtaking moves. First, the one that didn't come off on Oscar Piastri before he ultimately did get past, which was referred to the stewards for, in fairness, Piastri's side of things. And then his move late on Lewis, which was a great move, but it's like late in the race. Oh, like you feel nervous, don't you? Yeah, you just go, oh, really? Yeah, can you not just hold a whole position? But you credit to him for doing so. And some people have pointed this out as well. You almost have to question, if George had qualified 7th and Lewis had qualified in pole, would Lewis have kept the race craft together a little bit better? Would he have been more in the fight for the win than George ended up being? Would he have made those mistakes? And yes, there's a huge delta in terms of experience between the two. One's a 7-time world champion, one has 1 Grand Prix victory to their name. But there's a level of it felt kind of chaotic, and it was a chaotic race. And George had too many moments there. And as you have pointed out, and that isn't the first time, you refer back to wasn't for the race win, but Singapore last year, those little mistakes in the heat of the moment when it's most critical. And it's something he needs to eradicate from his, I was going to say game, I don't know if that's the right word, from his repertoire, and be more solid, more consistent in those moments.
It was a chaotic and brilliant race. However, it wasn't it was chaotic. It wasn't brilliant for Ferrari. Both cars retiring, obviously, as we said in the update after the race scene, similar to Perez, for Ferrari, their damage was done in qualifying after both cars being knocked out in Q2. Obviously, Leclerc had the engine problems during the race and obviously ended up putting into the pits to retire. Sainz, a driver error, nothing more. Turn 6, which obviously caught out an unfortunate Alex Albon. Again, it was Ferrari we were kind of expecting to, alongside McLaren, to take the fight potentially for the victory, but all weekend they just had nothing. There was no pace coming out of the SF24. And it does raise the question, are McLaren really the team we should be looking at, despite the fact they are 3rd in the standings? Are McLaren decide to take the fight to Red Bull, not Ferrari?
No, I think we can expect both to do so. I just think this was a one-off weekend shocker for Ferrari that they
after
will
Monaco.
quickly want after Monaco. 2 weeks after what they achieved and what in particular Charles Leclerc achieved around Monaco, which was a magnificent weekend. And all of a sudden, of course, we were talking about both Leclerc and Ferrari being potential title contenders, and now here we are 2 weeks later, pretty much writing them off. Well, I'm not writing them off. As I say, I do think it was just one of those weekends where things didn't go right. The car didn't suit the circuit, which means obviously, yes, they've therefore got things to address going forward. Obviously, there was a little engine issue with, not a little one, but an engine issue with Leclerc throughout the Grand Prix that ultimately led to retirements. That's something else they've got to look at and get on top of. So, whilst for all the plaudits they received after Monaco, and here we are being negative about them now, I'm not going to write them off at this stage, simply because it's only a 49-point gap. Yeah. If Red Bull right now is relying on one driver in Max Verstappen, compared to going up against the two of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz because Sergio Perez isn't doing a job, then most definitely Ferrari is still in the hunt for that Constructors title at this stage. I've always said that we are going to get a better handle on this season when it comes to the triple header, the European triple header coming up, Spain, Austria, Silverstone. I think then we'll be at the exact halfway point, 12 Grand Prix down, 12 Grand Prix to go. We will have the ideal picture as to how we're going to see the second half of the season going. If Red Bull is still in a little bit of a struggle with its car, the RB20, it's not quite got a full grip on that yet, as Max mentioned 3 or 4 times in his driver's press conference post-race. really urging them to get on top of these problems. And Ferrari does bounce back in Barcelona, and McLaren continues to be this major threat at a track like Barcelona, especially, then I think, sorry, excuse me, I think that we're in for a really, really good second half of the season if both those two teams, as I say, can keep the pressure on Red Bull. Right now, I'm going to write off the Canadian Grand Prix as a one-off for Ferrari.
Sam, same for you. Canadian Grand Prix, just a write-off?
Yes and no. I think the Canadian Grand Prix was in terms of the actual end result, yes. Like, you can't expect Ferrari to, fail to score points on many occasions this season. But I refer back to Imola, another, fast, quick, power-sensitive circuit where Ferrari's, I think it was the hybrid unit, is compromised in terms of the efficiency of the ERS, which was causing some difficulties for them there, because obviously early in the weekend, we really thought they would be strong, and they looked really strong. And then they just fell away in qualifying and couldn't quite they were the third best car behind the McLarens in that sense. I think we saw the same thing here, really, in Montreal. So I think at some circuits, they certainly are going to be the third best. There's a level of, are McLaren and Ferrari going to get in each other's way? Will they trip each other up? Because Ian's absolutely right. They are both there in that fight. It probably makes it, in some ways, a more difficult proposition for Verstappen, because you kind of wager that maybe Perez isn't, fourth. He then ends up being sixth in that fight. And, even fewer points, even further away from being able to be that rear gunner that he needs to be. So, yeah, I think we're certainly going to see both those teams in the fight. It will ebb and flow circuit to circuit between the three of them. And, yeah, I think it's going to be a fascinating prospect, though.
And as I said with regard to the Ferrari, that I'm just going to put that down as a one-off. Just one of those weekends every 18 can occasionally have. And we got to hope to a certain extent that wasn't a one-off for Mercedes either, that they have made the gains that they have been talking so positively about, that this isn't the false dawn that we've experienced in the past, where we thought, Mercedes looks like it's coming back. They were talking a good game, that they looked like they were coming back over the past 2 years, and they never did. This time around, they've been a little bit more careful with some of the comments that they've been making, but nevertheless, still edging on the side of positive. And now we have the positive result that they've been looking to gain. Okay, didn't get the win that they were perhaps hoping for coming out of qualifying, but nevertheless, they have proven that W15 now, certainly in Canada, is a car that can challenge towards the front, threaten Red Bull, McLaren and Ferrari. And as I say, Barcelona is going to be a key race now for all four teams, because we know that is a circuit that has been used so often in the past. You get it right at Barcelona, it pretty much means you can get it right at the bulk of the circuits going forward beyond the Spanish Grand Prix, because it is such a test bed of a track, used so often in the past, so many test sessions. As I say, you get it right there, you're pretty much going to be good for the rest of the season. So Barcelona, the Spanish Grand Prix for me, is going to be pivotal towards what the rest of the season is then going to offer.
The Spanish Grand Prix will be, as you said, a big weekend for a handful of teams, really. I want to go back, though, to a word you said a few minutes ago, Ian, addressed. And there is one team who quite clearly has some tension to address, and that is Alpine and Ocon. We said yesterday, or the early hours of this morning, should I say, the bridges are burning. It seems like the bridges are not only burning, they are hanging by an absolute thread. Ocon, again, very punchy in the media pen after the race. The big question now is, though, what are Alpine going to do with Ocon? Because obviously we know he's not there next season. We know, based on reports, obviously it's looking like he has got something sorted for next season. But the tension is just, it's not good for the team, especially on a weekend where actually they scored 3 points, both drivers in the points.
Yeah, and ordinarily they would have been celebrating that, particularly after what had happened in Monaco. The collision there between Esteban and Pierre. Esteban absolutely hauled over the coals by team principal Bruno Famin. As we know, threatened consequences. Everybody then alluded to the fact that it was, could he bin for the Canadian Grand Prix? That obviously wasn't the case. Yes, he lost the FP1 session, which was a little bit of a surprise in itself to Jack Doohan, because Canada is not ordinarily a circuit where you'd hand a reserve driver a practice session, but nevertheless, Alpine did it. And of course, coming into the Canadian Grand Prix, we learned that Esteban Ocon is out of a seat at the end of this year with Alpine on the back of the fact that, as far as the team is concerned, they have gone as far as they can in their relationship with Esteban, which quite clearly now is deteriorating at quite a rapid rate of knots. The Monaco Grand Prix incident, as we've said, Nick, was pretty much what appears to be the straw that broke the camel's back for Alpine as an organisation, and Bruno Famin in particular as team principal. And now all of a sudden we're talking about Jack Doohan potentially getting the seat. I think he deserves his opportunity.
Yeah.
Could they throw him in even earlier? Bruno Famin made clear in the build-up to the race over the weekend. I heard his comments on Sky Sports F1 where he said that they've got the rest of the season to get through now. They're confident that they can have a positive relationship. Well, blow me, less than 48 hours later after he makes those comments, there's Esteban Ocon pretty much blowing that apart with his pen comments, saying that, the team orders was wrong. It shouldn't have been applied. Just a bit of clarity. He was running 9th. Pierre Gasly was pretty much just behind him in 10th, and they were chasing Daniel Ricciardo ahead of them for that 8th place. And Alpine decided, Esteban, please allow Pierre to get past and have a go at Daniel. Esteban was convinced that at that late stage in the race, given the way it was unfolding, Pierre was never going to get close to Daniel, and so it proved. So he was pretty miffed in the pen. But at the end of the day, he doesn't really have a leg to stand on because he's the driver that's getting booted out at the end of the season. So you've got to play the team game. You've got to carry out the orders. He did that. He didn't want to do it. But the fact he made those comments in the pen afterwards, that's not going to enamour anybody within Alpine. Certainly not going to enamour Bruno Famin any more than he's already been enamoured anyway coming out of Monaco. So will they be looking at the fact that, bearing in mind it appears Esteban's got a seat elsewhere, and the likelihood it's with Haas, just to let people know that that's where he's likely going to end up alongside Oliver Behrman for next season? Who knows? I'm not going to rule it out.
Yeah.
At this stage, I am not going to rule out the possibility that he could be binned maybe over the summer break, and they bring in Ollie Behrman for half a season. Ollie Behrman, I do apologise. Jack Doohan for half a season over the second half of the campaign to give him a run, to then build him up, give him the confidence going into 2025.
Sam?
Seems like a decent plan to me.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah, completely. With a rapidly an improving Alpine as well. It's certainly a better prospect than it would have been at the start of the season. But you've got to also question, how would Haas, let's say it's Haas for definite, and never say never in F1. If I were Haas, I would be looking at those comments from Ocon in the mix zone afterwards and going, he's kind of bad mouthing his employer here. We're about to be his employer. I'm not sure how comfortable I feel about this. It's not a good look. It's one of those, you kind of expect him to take it on the chin, discuss it internally. And he didn't do that. And you can understand that, obviously, as you rightly points out, Nick, there's a case of kind of the bridges are burning at this stage.
Yeah.
What's the point in trying to kind of, keep it all internally? So yeah, it's a really difficult situation. What's interesting is how quickly it switches when it happens. It's like a real kind of fuse moment, because early in the weekend, Ocon really kind of went out and sold the whole FP1 thing pretty well. I'm not sure if I completely buy it, as Ian clearly doesn't, but he was like, oh yeah, well, we expect the cars to be better later in the year, so we didn't want to waste a session, in say Mexico or Abu Dhabi, where it's conventional to run a rookie in FP1. And given that I was going to be towards the back anyway, we figured, why not? It's less, my qualifying is less critical. It's all about the race. It makes sense to get it out the way here. In theory, some good PR work, right? I'm not sure if I'm completely sold, but all of a sudden, as soon as something started to go against him, it was like, nah, I'm not having this. I'm annoyed. And I do understand his frustration, but as I said before, you've just got to take it on the chin sometimes, especially when you're the outgoing driver.
I agree.
Yeah, no, so it's something, again, another topic I think we'll probably be discussing a bit more over the coming weeks, and if any further incidents happen. Right, shall we do a couple fan questions? Because we do have some really good questions from our fans. And I'm going to come to you first, Sam, for this one, because I know you believe quite heavily in this. So this question is from Vinak. Obviously, first asks for our Perez opinions. Well, I think we've given that already. But in their opinion, they say, let Yuki Tsunoda drive for Red Bull. You feel quite strongly about that, don't you?
I don't know if I feel strongly.
You did, based on an article you wrote. Don't leave me hanging now. Come on. You wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago on why Yuki Tsunoda deserves a chance at Red Bull.
I probably did. I'll tell you what, Nick, I've got a terrible memory, so I'll have to look back. But I do.
Well done, Sam.
Thanks, Sam, mugging off the host. God.
No, but I do agree. I do think he deserves a seat. I think that Perez hasn't done enough in the last few rounds. I think they could just do with a bit of fresh blood. I think changing up the dynamic isn't a bad thing. Perez and Verstappen is now will become the longest partnership in F1 history. It's a long time they've been teammates. So I think that really Tsunoda has earned that opportunity. We saw last year he was very, very good straight out of the gates, even with a poor AlphaTauri. And this year he's easily beaten Daniel Ricciardo. Pretty much racing.
Not in Canada. In the majority, though, yes.
The majority of the time, and the point standings reflect so. But very good point. That Ricciardo has had a better weekend, but he hasn't done enough to get the seat at this stage. Correct. So Tsunoda being the only kind of alternative, therefore, I think what gets under people's skin is that it feels like he's never been a consideration.
Yeah,
he's like just a kind of, he is here. He will do 5, 6, 7 seasons in F1, all at AlphaTauri, Red Bull, second Red Bull team. And we've seen from Pierre Gasly, drivers don't want that. They want to take their own course. Being in the second team feels kind of limited. So I think he should have a chance. Whether or not they'll make that change for 2025, it's interesting timing, announcing Tsunoda's extension or them taking up the option on his contract, if not partly to just quash any suggestion that he might go to Alpine. But we'll have to see if Perez continues to really struggle throughout the rest of the year. Who knows? It's been threatened before.
Interesting. And a question for you, Ian, coming from another fan, and again, I apologise if I pronounce his name wrong, but Rilnia, the future or forecast of Carlos Sainz. And actually, there were some really good quotes from Williams team principal James Vowles. So Williams are known to be interested in Carlos, and out of all the team principals, he is one who I personally really like because he seems to speak honestly, openly, and quite fantastically. I don't think that's a word, but it is now.
We'll let you off, Nick. Don't worry about that. James Vowles making quite a very open approach to Carlos Sainz. He stated unequivocally, he is our number one target, which basically means, I kind of guessed it anyway, but Logan Sargent, bye-bye, thank you ever so much. We gave you another chance this season. Okay, you've not really lived up to it. You've done a little bit better, but not that much. But now we really are going in a different direction with this team. And James Vowles just stated quite categorically, we want you, Carlos. Please come and join us. This is the trajectory of the team, and my hand's going up for anybody that can't see the video. He's firmly believing that, as he's stating, there is now tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars being invested in that team. And they see Carlos as a huge player in this team going forward. Yes, it is definitely on an upward trajectory. You get the feeling that that's the case. The antiquated processes that James has talked about in the past, that he is now correcting to an extraordinary amount, is starting to pay considerable dividends. They're bringing in, he said over the weekend in Canada, around about 30 new faces, something like along those lines, that they've managed to plunder from other teams. This is part of the merry-go-round, of course, that we don't see within Formula One, all these backroom staff that flip from team to team. But he did say there were going to be some big names coming in. But he wants now an A-line driver lineup. He believes he's got one of those drivers in Alex Albon already, but he really wants somebody now alongside Alex who can push Alex. Let's face it, Logan Sargent is not pushing Alex Albon. I think Sam pointed out it's 31-0 in terms of the qualifying record between Alex and Logan, which is just absolutely extraordinary in Formula One these days. So whilst Logan has done his best, it's clearly not been good enough for Williams, and quite clearly he's going to be out of a seat at the end of this season. But Carlos has a big decision to make. I think when he was asked about James Vowles' comments, he referred to the fact that I'm just weighing things up, because he also knows he's got the prospect of joining Audi. So for him, now that he knows Red Bull has gone, now that he knows he's not going to get the seat at Mercedes, because Toto Wolff has made it quite clear that they want to go with youth, that Kimi Antonelli is their future, be it whether he's in that car in 25 or 2026, we're not quite sure yet. So those top two seats gone. Ferrari's obviously gone because he's out of there anyway. Aston Martin might have been a possibility if Lawrence Stroll decided to get his son out of that seat and have an all-Spanish driver lineup of Fernando and Carlos. Still a very slim possibility, you got to say. But right now, for Carlos, it's looking as if it's a straight choice between Williams on one hand and Audi on the other. And he's got to weigh up. Does he go with the established name that's going to have a great power unit brand behind it in 2026, that's already got all the infrastructure and is clearly going like that? Or does he go with the manufacturer that knows it's going to struggle? It's not going to, hit the ground running in many respects in 2026. But nevertheless, given all the resources at its disposal in terms of money, manpower, and facilities, that pretty much 3, maybe 4 years into its project, it might be towards the front of the grid. It's a big decision to make. And if those are the most definitive two choices that Carlos Sainz has got, I wouldn't know which way to call it. Because whilst there are short-term gains with Williams, because it's already the established team, you've got to assume that the longer-term prospects are with Audi, simply because of the name, and as I say, all those resources behind it.
Rowan, there is the answer to your question, and Vinek as well. Thank you for your question, guys. Very quickly to end this episode of the Racing News 365.com podcast, a rapid takeaway from the Canadian Grand Prix. I'll go first. I think we have a big fight for the Constructors' Championship, not the Drivers' Championship. I think Verstappen winning at a track where McLaren and Ferrari should have been stronger, and Max still getting the win. I think that's a big blow, I think, to the potential Drivers' Championship fight. But I think the Constructors, with Perez not performing, that's very much on. Sam?
My big takeaway is maybe not a take away from the Canadian Grand Prix, but it's kind of, we've seen it across the weekend. I think in terms of fighting Red Bull, McLaren have the package, Ferrari have the drivers. If you could combine those, I think, Red Bull would be in real trouble. But as I said before, I think Oscar's a little bit of a step behind the other three. And I think the Ferrari package is a little bit of a step behind the McLaren. So I think ultimately that will help Red Bull prevail.
Yeah.
But Sergio Perez certainly needs to up his game.
Ian, bring us home.
The Mercedes are back in the fight. I genuinely believe that was not a one-off performance in Canada. I do actually believe them on this occasion that they have been making the correct steps forward. Yeah. And what we saw in Canada was the upshot of those steps. And I do believe that there's more to come from Mercedes, both in terms of what they can do with that car. I think they're not quite just scratching the surface. I think they're just a little bit below that now. But I think now that they are on this right route, that they know now that the future steps they're going to take with it are only going to push it even more towards the front. And I think Mercedes are going to make it not so much a four-way fight for the constructors, because I think they're too far back at this stage, certainly behind Red Bull. But I do think they're going to make it a four-way fight for most Grand Prix victories going forward over the rest of this season.
Awesome stuff. And obviously for those watching on YouTube, let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. This has been the latest episode of the Racing News 365.com podcast from Ian, Sam and myself. We will see you for the next episode next Monday. See you later.
Take care, folks.
Bye for now.